بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بكم مجددا في أمسية جديدة من أمسيات الإجراءات. هذه الأمسيات التي نتناول فيها موضوعات تتعلق بإدارة إجراءات العمل لننشر هذه الثقافة مستفيدين من خبرتنا وخبرة شركائنا العالميين ومن ممارستنا وتطبيقنا في سوق العمل، لنقرب هذه الممارسات العالمية إلى السوق المحلي ونحول الكلام النظري الموجود في الكتب والأطروحات إلى واقع عملي يستطيع العامل في مجال الإجراءات أن يطبقه. موضوعنا اليوم من الموضوعات المميزة جدا، فنحن اليوم نتناول تحسين الإجراءات لكن من منظور مختلف. نحن اليوم سنقول إن إجراء تحسين الإجراءات هو الآخر يحتاج إلى تحسين. معنا شريكنا الدائم الخبير العالمي روجر تريقير، وسيأخذنا خلال هذه الساعة في رحلة ممتعة ومفيدة عن هذا الموضوع. So welcome Roger and go ahead.
Thank you, Malik, and good evening to everyone there if you're listening live, or hello if you're listening to a recording of this webinar. It's great to be back doing another session with my good friends at ES Consulting, and we're going to talk in this session about the process of process improvement and how we can improve that process. It's a fundamentally important process, so we should be working on that to make sure it's working as best as we possibly can. So Malik might have given you just a bit of background there, and I won't go through all of the details, but I mean, I spend my life doing this sort of thing, talking to people about processes and process performance and process management, and I've done that in lots and lots of organizations around the world. And the point to gain from that is that the sort of things that I will say, the material that we'll cover in this session, is well proven in many projects. It's come out of those projects around the world in many different sorts of organizations, large and small, and public sector and private sector in different countries around the world, including many in the kingdom itself. So the sort of things that we talk about here, they're not just theory, they're good theory, but they're backed up with good practice. And you can find lots of my material on my own website or anywhere else. I'm easy to find, lots of publications, lots of recorded videos, if you want to follow up on any other points. And as we go through this webinar, if you've got a question, by all means ask it. You can pop that in the chat or raise your hand, interrupt me if you like. And perhaps Malik also suggested that if you want to do that in Arabic, I'm sure he'll translate for me. So, as I say, I walk around the world, and I do that through partners all around the world, including ES Consulting, ES Learning, etc. in the Arab states, particularly in Saudi Arabia. And I've been working with ES, well, since before it was ES, really. I think it's like 16 years now, maybe it's headed for 17 years that we've been working together in very many ways. And I'm here, I'm under that big red dot down at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. I'm in a little village called Bungendore, which is just near, maybe 15, 20 minutes from Canberra, the national capital of Australia, which, if you have some Australian geography, is about 300 kilometres southwest of Sydney. So I'm here in my office right now, and it's Thursday morning at 4 a.m. For me, 4:05 a.m. And we've got people all over the world participating in this webinar, which is always a terrific thing. So let's get on. These webinars that we're doing every month or so come from the latest book that I published. It's called Process Provocations, and it came out of a series of posts that I was doing on each week on LinkedIn, and we ended up with 42 of them, and I took those posts and we added some more material. So in the book, which is available as a free download, certainly from my website and perhaps from ES Consulting website as well, but it's easy to find, just contact us. Each of these pages deals with one of the topics of process-based management. Each page stands alone, so if you wanted to use it in that way, you could just open it up, pick any page at random and use that as the basis for a conversation, which is kind of what we've been doing with these webinars, and now there are a few recorded webinars that come from Provocation's book. In this webinar, we're going to be on page 29 of the book, the page that's called Improvement Needs Improving. And we're going to be talking, as I say, about the process of process improvement and how we can make that work as best as we possibly can. So here's the question. I love this question. And some of you will have heard me ask this before, because I think it's a really important question. And it's this: what if? What if the best process in your organization was the one by which you improved all of your other processes? I mean, just think about that. The most efficient and effective process in your organization was the process of process improvement. Wouldn't that have a profound effect? I mean, the thing that you are best at is improving all your other processes. That would be terrific, wouldn't it? I mean, you just think the consequences of that. What would happen from that? You'd always be improving in a very meaningful way. The performance of the organization would increase. You'd be able to incorporate innovations. You'd be finding problems before they even arose so that you could avoid having them in the first place. This is what we mean by continuous improvement, isn't it? Continuous improvement. Not once a year, not every now and then, not when someone screams at us enough. No, continuous improvement means exactly that. But what does it mean in the real world? What does it mean in our organizations? I think we can have two problems with continuous improvement. And I think the first one is that it may not be continuous. You know, it just happens from time to time. We get a burst on and then we get distracted, something else is happening, everyone's too busy. So it's not continuous. There's no sense of us always improving a process. Process improvement projects are things that happen from time to time. Perhaps when a problem arises, what is the trigger for the process of process improvement? So it's not continuous. And sometimes I'm not sure how much improvement we get. Now that might be for two reasons. It might be that there isn't much improvement. It just didn't happen. Or we don't know, because we had a problem that we wanted to solve, something was taking too long, and we did some things that should make it faster, but nobody's measuring, nobody's tracking the progress. So we really don't know whether it improved or not. So, if we're talking about continuous improvement and we've got, two problems, it's not very continuous and there's not enough improvement, then I think we can agree that process improvement needs improving. And there's plenty of ways we can do that. Let's have a look in a bit more detail, firstly, at a list of symptoms, the sorts of things that might tell us that we need to do something about the process of process improvement. Just go through these lists just to name them, and then we'll come back and look at each of them in a little more detail. So we've all been in process improvement projects, I imagine, where, it feels like it goes well, and we get to the end of it and we've got recommendations. Here's the 2B recommendations, the process redesign changes. And we, give the presentation and everyone thinks that's fantastic, you did a great job. And then nothing, or not much. The changes don't get made. We'll come back and talk about these things, but just changes not getting made. We made more recommendations than we made changes. And the PIPs, the process improvement projects, they often feel a bit random. They're not systematic. We run a process improvement project on the wrong process. We haven't selected the process well before we even start the PIP. And some process analysis and improvement methodologies are really complicated. They take a long time. They're very hard to do. And that's not going to be conducive to lots of process improvement. And perhaps because of the things we've just been mentioning, if we don't have a track record of demonstrating that process improvement actually works and delivers real improvement to the business, then why would anyone have confidence? And there's a sort of spiral dive, isn't there? A vicious circle. If we don't have confidence, then we won't want to do it. And if we don't do it, then we won't be delivering benefits. So we'll have even less confidence, then the whole thing falls apart. So, we've got to be able to see that it's worth doing. People are busy. So why would they invest their time and effort in this? A trap I see many organizations fall into as well is to center all of the process improvement work on the central group, the Office of BPM, the Center of Excellence, whatever. And that's a self-limiting strategy. Those people can't be everywhere. Doesn't matter how good they are. They can't be everywhere at the same time. So ultimately, they'll become a bottleneck. And then last on the list, we're often talking, almost always talking about some form of cross-functional process, some process running across the organization chart involving multiple business units. And it may well be nobody's job to even think about the performance of that process. There are people who are thinking about the various pieces of it, but not the whole thing. So these are 6 symptoms, six things that we might look out for. Let's now have a look at each of those in detail and see what we should be, what it's about and what we can do to avoid it and to solve the problem. So here's the first one that we had on our list, that changes are not made. So, the whole idea of a process improvement project is to create a new as is, not just the to be. The to be it feels like the immediate output of a process improvement project. Here are the 3 or 4 or 5, whatever it is, recommendations for change to the process to fix some problem or to capitalize on some opportunity. But that's not where it's supposed to stop. I mean, if it stops there, then what was the point? It was a waste of time. So we need to have a mechanism where we can actually make those changes. We need to come up with good changes, good recommendations for change, and then we need to be able to actually make the change. Because if we don't, then we don't do what it's all about. It's all about delivering proven, valued business benefits. I think this is a key phrase: proven, valued business benefits. Benefits for the business, valued by the business, and proven with objective, credible data about which there's no dispute. And that's a tough standard that we set ourselves, but if we're not doing that, then what do we think we're doing? Our process improvement work is not about just having lots of process models or even a big long list of KPIs or a nice looking process architecture. These are just tools. What it's all about is actually delivering proven, valued business benefits. Benefits to the business, not just to the BPM team. So benefits to the business and valued by the business and proven with objective, reliable data about which there's no dispute. And we need to be testing that all of the time. So one of the things that we might look out for when we're doing our process improvement projects is whether there's an actual compelling reason to make the change we're suggesting. And that comes to impact analysis. Now that's in most methodologies, but sometimes it's not given enough emphasis. What is the actual impact of making the change or of not making the change? I mean, who cares? It might be a problem or an opportunity that we could fix the problem or realize the opportunity, but is there enough urgency about it for people to be concerned, to actually want to get on and do it? And you'll know there are several different approaches to change management, several different frameworks, Kotter, ProSci, etc. And every framework for change management that you'll ever see has up front, somewhere, usually right at the start, something about ensuring that there's enough urgency, organizational urgency in some form to actually make the change. I mean, we might be excited about it if we participated in the PIP and we can see that this would be terrific and we make the recommendation, but unless other people are as excited about it as we were, then it's not going to happen. So we need to have a compelling reason for making the change, a compelling reason for not just leaving it as it is. And that's going to come from some useful impact analysis. Okay, so what would good look like? WWGLL, what would good look like? That's the most important question, I think, for in our process world, perhaps in our lives generally, huh? What would good look like? Wiggle, WWGLL. So I think we should do this. So if for those who have done process architecture development work with us, you know that we end up with some processes that are about the process of process improvement. So we might have a process called improve process performance or a similar term. Now that's a process we need to manage well. So it needs to have its own process KPIs and targets. And I think we should be measuring that very carefully. We should set up as a target the actual delivery of those change projects. And the target, you know, it needs to be at least 90%. We only made recommendations out of our PIPs for things that we thought should happen. So I think you could actually argue that the target should be 100%, but at least 90%. Maybe it's more like 95 or 98. Because we should be doing it. We've gone to all of the trouble in the process improvement project to say these are things we should change. Here's how to do it. You know, here's some reasons why. Okay, we would expect them to happen, wouldn't we? And sometimes I think we're not getting enough of that done. So, you know, set that process KPI for delivery of the change projects and set the target for that high, at least 90%. And then measure it and track it. And if it's 80%, you need to understand why. You know, where was the problem? Is it, did we pick the wrong process in the first place? Is there something wrong with our analysis? Is there something wrong with our communication? Was the impact analysis not good enough? Whatever the problem is, it's an opportunity to improve. Now, let's run a little poll. I'll just launch this poll. Relaunch the poll. Okay, so you've got that poll on your screen, little box just popped up. And I'm just asking there for your personal best guess. And by the way, this is entirely anonymous. We won't know what anyone is saying in particular. But in your organization, what percentage of changes that are recommended from process improvement projects do you think actually get made as they were meant to get made? You may not know the exact number, but what do you think is the closest kind of number to it? And you'll discover if you just click on one of those boxes and submit, then that pop-up window will disappear for you. And we'll just let that run as we go through the webinar, and I'll come back to it later and we'll have a look at the results. So just have a think about that and click on that, so we can have a look. And as I say, it's anonymous. No one will know anyone's particular answer. Okay, so let's come back to our presentation. Here's the next symptom that we see where our process improvement projects are a bit random. They're not systematic. And now we need to avoid these random acts of management. If we choose the wrong process to improve, we cannot get the good result. So if we're just choosing a process because it's, I don't know, kind of interesting, or we've got a lot of data for it, so let's do that one, or it would be easy to do. I mean, none of these are good enough reasons. the fundamental principle of process improvement, that if we choose the wrong process to improve, we can't get optimum results. Now, in every one of your organizations, you've got hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of processes, depending how deep you go down in the process hierarchy. You can't possibly even manage them all, even if it's just hundreds. So which ones should we be improving? We need to have some systematic way of doing that so that we can be sure that we're choosing the right process to start with. And we need to be able to do that based on being sure that the processes we choose, the choice is made based on hard evidence, performance evidence that there's some problem, a current problem or an emerging problem, or that there's some idea for change. We almost need a business case to even start a process improvement project. Why this process? Why now? And as we said before, if we pick the wrong process, then what's going to happen? Well, yeah, we'll run it. We'll run a process improvement project and we'll come up with some recommendations, I guess, because we'll feel we have to, but no one else cares. No one else cares enough to make the changes, so they won't happen. So what did we do? Well, we just wasted a lot of time. So in brief, the suggestion is to get the circles turning. If you've seen previous presentations about the circles, then you'll have some understanding of what that means. And there's plenty of material and videos about the circles elsewhere. But essentially, we're saying that for every process that we're going to actively manage, we've set targets for process KPIs, and then we're going to assess that performance and assess ideas for change, and then we'll respond to that assessment. And if we need to, we'll trigger the process improvement project, that is the PI circle. And the PO circle keeps turning. That's the important point. So for our process, we're always at an appropriate frequency, we're always looking at the performance of the process that we want to actively manage. Is it meeting the KPI targets? Is it exceeding them? Maybe that's too much. If it's meeting them now, will it be meeting them next week, next month? What forecasts can we make? What ideas are there for change? What problems? What risk analysis can we be doing? So we need to build a deep knowledge of the process if we're going to be doing that kind of active management. And what would good look like? Well, good would look like that we've got processes that are being selected for a PIP based on hard evidence, not just random selections. When you first start, if it's the first few PIPs you're doing, then maybe it's obvious which ones to do, and maybe you are going to take some easy ones just to learn the methodology, but you get past that very quickly, and now we've got to be making wise decisions about which processes we should be improving. Because if we choose the wrong process, then we've got a problem. Okay, now, takes too long, too much effort, too long, too hard. You know this probably. There are some methodologies out there that are resource hungry, they're inefficient, they're hard to learn, they're difficult to execute. I don't say they don't work. They work well if you've got the resources and you've got the skills and the experience. But, it's not an efficient process. In those cases, the process of process improvement is not efficient. It might come up with results, but it's expensive to do. It's hard to do. People tend to resent it. It just doesn't build up this nice culture of continuous improvement. So if we want to have continuous improvement genuinely happening in our organization, it must be seen as a solution, not a new problem. If people in the organization think, oh, no, we've got to do more of that process workshop stuff, and they try and find ways not to turn up, then that's hardly going to result in continuous improvement. But if people are saying, yeah, look, we've got some problems, let's get that process improvement stuff going because we know it works. We can be confident about it and it's fun to do. So what we want to do, what would good look like? Well, good would look like everyone loves to do it. And if we're going to generate that kind of enthusiasm, then we just need to make sure that the process works and it's managed and it's measured. We can't be telling everyone to improve their processes if the very process that we want them to use to do that isn't also being managed. It needs to be managed and measured and improved. It needs to be the best process you've got. And then the high quality outcome that we're looking for, what would good look like? It would also be that we can get it done reasonably quickly. No, maybe we can get it done in 5 or 10 days, not 5 or 10 weeks. You know, we really need to be able to be agile, to get in there, do it quickly, do it properly. We don't want to trivialize it. But there's a lot of wasted time and effort on lots of process improvement projects. And oftentimes that's because we just weren't prepared. We started without being prepared. So we need to be able to get in there and get it done quickly, and then deliver the results, communicate that the results were delivered, or if they weren't delivered, learn from that, so that we're in a continuous improvement and continuous learning condition. Now, particularly there in the kingdom, you have the amazing benefit of having access to the people who know most about what I think is the best process improvement methodology anywhere. Now, that's a big statement, but I believe it. And I'm not saying that because I had much involvement in its development. I was involved in some early conversations, and I've had some input from time to time, but it's the guys at ES Consulting that have really put this together, and they use it all the time to great effect. And some of you will know more about it because you've been part of PIPs using Sprint PIP. But I remember well having a conversation with our good friend Bassam Al-Karashi in the lobby of a hotel there in Riyadh quite a while ago now, and we were talking about process improvement and how we might be able to make it better, make it more agile, perhaps use the ideas of the sprint. And one of the things that we were saying at that time, the criteria we were saying, is that wouldn't it be nice to actually complete a PIP in 5 or 10 days rather than have to do 5 or 10 days training before you could even start? So that was one of the early parameters we set for ourselves. And now, you know, Sprint PIP, I think, is terrific, and it works well. It's very focused, it's very agile, it's very interactive, lots of graphic interactions. It's fun to do, people enjoy it, and it works. So, you know, what more can you want? And it's still classic, as is to be, to do. So, you know, an important part of it is that very first step at the top there, where we get to be PIP ready before anything else is happening. And that might take a while, but as long as there's a cycle of continuously running PIPs, it doesn't matter how long that first bit takes. If it takes weeks or 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 days, it doesn't matter, because we've got lots of PIPs going on. So we get PIP ready, and then we get in and we go hard, and we come up with the right recommendations with nice impact analysis, and then follow through and make those changes happen. So you're very fortunate right there in the kingdom. You've got access to the world's experts on the world's best process improvement methodology. You should take great advantage of that. Now, here's another symptom we mentioned. You know, if we don't understand, if we don't believe in the methodology, you know, we've got some fears about process improvement. You know, lots of people do. They think, oh, my job might be at risk here. Or there's some uncertainty about how it all works, or some doubt about whether it's even worth doing. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt will kill most projects. And if we're not confident about the fact that it actually works and is worth doing, then why would it happen? And we also need to break through the barrier that we need to gain the share of mind for decision makers about these things, don't we? Because everyone's busy. Now, we want to pop in there and talk to them about improving a particular process. And everybody's got a limited amount of attention. We all have an attention budget. So if we can't grab some attention budget from decision makers, then nothing's going to happen. And we're not going to be able to do that unless everybody's confident that process improvement projects actually work. They actually deliver some of those proven valued business benefits. What's the return on effort? If the general thought in the organization is, oh yeah, look, it takes a long time and it's a waste, nothing ever happens. Well, why would you start one? It would be irrational to start one. So communication is going to be so important. And we need to promote those positive outcomes, not just do the PIP. Certainly we need to do the PIP, and then we need to make the changes. And don't stop there. Tell the world about the changes. Show how it worked. You could write a paper on it, you could put some slides together, you could record a quick video, you could get people together regularly in the organization for a quick 20-minute PIP presentation. You can do all of these sorts of things. It's so easy these days to communicate and communicate well. And I think we miss that step too often. It's about marketing. People that do marketing don't, stop as soon as the product's available. That's when they start. So we need to be able to do that. And any communication plan we're going to have can be multi-channel. There's so many things we could do. That all the various channels that we could have to get that material to people. Anything from a basic, text message, WhatsApp message through to an online video or physical presentation. All of these things are possible, and you probably need multiple different ways to get to different people in the organization. And what would good look like? Well, I think it's as simple as this. People would be queuing up to participate in a PIP because it's fun, it works, it's a great use of time, it solves problems, it finds opportunities, and people would just think it's a terrific thing to do. People would be thinking, oh, next week I'm going to be part of a PIP. Fantastic. Not, oh, I wonder if I can get out of that PIP next week. That's not going to work, is it? We want people to be really excited about the fact that they've been invited to be in a PIP, and for the whole organization to start saying, okay, this is great stuff. Let's do more of it. How can we do it? How can we facilitate our own PIPs, etc.? That's the sort of level of excitement that we need. So the next one, it's a very common thing for organizations to assume that all of the process improvement work is going to get done by the central BPM group, the Centre of Excellence, the process team, the business excellence team, the organizational excellence team, whatever it's called in different organizations. But that small group of people who's there to be the super users and to be the internal experts and consultants in the whole process management and process improvement space. Now, that's never going to be an infinitely large team. It's always going to be quite a small team, really. And if you say that all of the process work must involve them, all of the PIPs must involve someone from the process team, and if it's successful and they do a good job, then what happens? Well, they become a bottleneck. And you've just invented the Office for the Prevention of Process Improvement. Because they can't be everywhere and they're doing a great job, but people are going to contact them and say, hey, we love what you're doing. We hear it's great. Can you come and help us with some process improvement? And they'll say, yeah, sure. Yeah, great. We'll be there in 6 months because we're busy. And then everybody is a lot less excited than they used to be. So you can't do that. When we start, of course, we need to, in the early days, then the process team is going to do a lot more of the process improvement project work. They're going to be there, and they might be participating in all of it in the early days. But we need to have a deliberate plan. When you think about the process improvement workshop, we might start with the process team at the front of the room, but we've got to actively work to get them to the back of the room so they're not running the show, and then ultimately get them out of the room so that these things are being run by the business themselves, by the various business units. Now, the central team is always going to pop in from time to time because they have a quality management role to play, but no one's dependent on them to do that. So we need to be able to build what I call the process management capability development plan. It won't happen unless we've got a plan. And this doesn't need to be a huge and complicated document, but we just need to say, for all of the various types of people in our organization, and perhaps in different geographies if we're distributed, how are we going to give them the necessary experience and expertise that they need to do their piece of work? Now, it doesn't mean that everyone's got to go off and do training courses. I mean, some people need to be able to create a process model, sure, but many people just need to know how to read a process model. But that's a very different thing. Some people need to be able to facilitate a process improvement project, but other people just need to be able to participate. So there's various levels, and we need a plan for that. And so the capability development plan doesn't need to be a massive document. It might just be a few pages, but it needs to exist, and we need to make it happen. And perhaps the learning and development folk in various organizations would get involved as well. We just need some kind of program, and maybe we're going to build that program internally, or we're going to use some external resources. It might be a mix of those kinds of things. So as I say, we don't want just 5 process analysts, we want 5,000, just to say that everybody in the organization should be able to participate in some way in the whole exercise of improving process performance. And what would good look like? Well, I think it's another KPI that we could set around process improvement processes, and it would be to measure how many PIPs are happening without the direct involvement of the Office of BPM, the process team, Centre of Excellence, whatever you call it. I mean, actually measure that. How many PIPs are happening out there successfully that don't require the process team to be at the front of the room, to be facilitating the exercise? And as I say, when we start, that's not going to be many, perhaps none, but over time, a year or two, that should be getting to be quite a high percentage, because it's the only way we can get genuine continuous improvement right across the organization. So here's the next one. And this is an important one, isn't it? Because the question is, whose job is it? If we're talking about cross-functional processes, that is, processes that are happening, as it were, across the organization chart, and we know that's how work gets done, don't we? It gets done through collaboration across the organization. Someone does one bit, another team does another piece, another team does something else, and eventually we've got a product or a service or an experience we can deliver to customers and external stakeholders. But whose job is it to do that? We know all about who's in charge up and down the org chart. That's what org charts do. But the org chart is actually quite silent about what's happening, who's in charge across. And that's the whole thing about process-based management, that we're adding that horizontal management overlay. So if it's nobody's job, of course, then no one will know whether the improvements happened for the particular process. No one's doing it. Everyone's focused on their own job, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what we tell people to do. We tell business units and teams and people in teams, we tell them, this is your job, get on with it. And we measure them like that, so that's the whole vertical functional organization thing. We're not changing that, but we do need to add this horizontal process view so that we're actually measuring and managing, and it's someone's role, not a full-time job, but someone's role to actually think about whether the process is performing as well as it should be. So how are we going to do that? Well, we need to have a process governance mechanism. Too complicated to go into the details here, but this is about process ownership, escalation paths, support mechanisms, and perhaps this new role, which you might call process owner. And whether we need to be able to make that work and support people in doing that. Now, as I say, we've got hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of processes. Are we going to do that for all of them? It doesn't seem practical, and it's not. But the good news is we don't have to do it for all of them. We just have to identify high impact processes. Now, in a large, complex organization, I often see that high impact processes might be maybe 30. Maybe it's 20 or 30, maybe over time it would grow a bit, it might be 40 or 50, but it's not hundreds. We can't do that for hundreds. So we just focus on high impact processes. And if you've done projects with us, you know that we don't even start with 30, we'll start with 3. And you can do that. You know, it's an incremental, agile way of doing it. It doesn't take lots of resources. We just prove it and we build it. Once we've got 3 going well, we can do another 3. And once we've got 6 going well, maybe we can pick another 10 because we're getting good at it. So it's an incremental kind of thing. So we need to create that kind of process, cross-functional process governance. There needs to be management. So our good would look like we've got our high impact processes under active management. And active management means where those circles are turning. Essentially, you know, we've identified the right process, we've set KPIs and targets, we're collecting the data, we're collecting ideas, we're assessing what we should be doing about that and responding to the assessment. We're making sure that the KPIs and targets are kept up to date, and we're triggering process improvement projects when we need to, and we might do that because there's an actual problem or there's an emergent performance problem, or we've got an idea. Here's a bit of new technology. How might that be applied to this process? Let's run a PIP and think about that. So, and high impact processes under active management. Now we know. Now we've got an owner for cross-functional performance, and we can track that. We can publicize it. We can communicate that, and continuously improve it. So, how does all of that come together? What does active process management look like? Let's use this picture here just to run through it for you. Down here at the bottom, we're talking about managing performance. So we identify a performance gap. What's the impact of the gap? Is there a business case for change? And if there is, get on and do it. So that's about managing performance. But we started out saying, is there a performance gap? So that implied we knew something about what performance we wanted. So before we can do that, we need to actually define what we mean by good performance. What would good look like? And then we can have discussions with the process stakeholders about the objectives. We can use that to build process KPIs and KPI targets. So now we've defined the process performance and we could manage to that. But which process? Okay, at the lower 2 levels of this diagram, we were talking about individual processes, but before we can get to that point, we have to define the processes. So we create process architecture, which will give us a structure where we can locate every process we have if we need to. And we do that by looking at the strategy, what promises do we make, and then we can build the process architecture. So those bottom 2 levels, as you can see over on the right-hand side, that's what I'm meaning by active process management. We're defining performance, we're collecting the data, we're taking note of it, we're acting when we need to, and we're all the time thinking about the process and its performance and its challenges and its risks, etc. So when we run this kind of project, of course, we do it in the other direction. We start with strategy and we say, what does our strategy promise? And that lets us build the architecture. Then we can think about defining what good performance looks like. And we do that by looking at the objectives and KPIs, and we can set targets for the process performance. And now that we've got targets, now we can start looking at managing that process. And we can do that. We identify performance gaps, opportunity gaps or performance gaps, and we understand, we do some analysis on the impact of the gap or fixing it or not fixing it. If there's a business case for change, then we can get on and make the change. So that's what it's all about, isn't it? If the process of process improvement is working well, then this is what's happening. And it's happening regularly across the organization, across all of our high impact processes. So to summarize, what should we do? Well, as always, first thing we do is catch our enterprise process architecture, our EPA. If we don't know what our processes are, we can't do much at all. We need to communicate to everybody involved, and everybody is involved if we're going to have this capability across the organization. We need to encourage people to be involved. We certainly need to be briefing executive decision makers big time. Because at the end of the day, we can start this stuff bottom up, but we need senior executive support ultimately to make it happen. We've got to enable them to see the benefit of it and then to go on and make good decisions based on process. And then we've got to prioritize. You know, if we don't select the right process to improve, then we're not going to get a good result. That's the first step. You know, which process should we improve? We've got hundreds, thousands, we've got plenty of them. Which one should we be working on? We're going to focus on our high impact processes, the HIPs, and we're going to actively manage them as we've just been discussing. And we start that slowly. Just start with 3, not 30. I'm not saying it can't work if you do the big bang approach and start with 30, but it's hard work. Start with 3, prove it works, deliver the benefits, communicate, etc. And deliver, you know, proven, valued business benefits is what we're all about. And then don't stop at the end of the PIP. You know, we have to, in some way, demand the changes happen. We've got to track that. Don't just, okay, and we've done our job. Because unless the changes happen, then the process improvement project was a waste of time. And then, of course, we have to actively manage that process improvement process, the process of process improvement. We can't be telling the rest of the organization to improve their processes if we can't also show that the process of process improvement is subject to such review. So this takes us back to our original question. What if? What if the best process in your organization was the process of process improvement? That would have a profound effect, wouldn't it? Can you do that? Does it sound too hard? Sure, you can do it. There are people that are doing it. There are organizations doing it right now. And we've just been discussing some of the ways you can do that. And I thank you for your time and attention, and I would love to take your questions or comments. And again, if you have any that you'd prefer to give in Arabic, then I'm sure Malik will translate for me. While you're thinking of those questions, I just ended the poll, and you can now see on your screens the poll data. Nobody said 90%, and not many people said 80%. You know, we've got an average there. That what would it be? Maybe it's somewhere around 60% if we were to chart those, huh? 60%. What are the percentages telling us? If we leave out the don't knows, yeah, we've got 70% of people say it's no more than 70% of those changes get made. So, you know, what's the problem? We recommend the wrong changes. Is there not enough urgency? I don't know. I mean, I can't tell, of course, but it should be better, shouldn't it? I hope we can get to a point where everybody says it's, you know, 90%. Because you don't do a process improvement project and make recommendations and expect them not to happen. You come out of a PIP with, I don't know, might vary, but 3 or 4, maybe 5 recommendations for change. And surely the PIP team expects them all to happen. It wasn't, you know, vague recommendations. We've done some analysis, we've done the work, you know, why wouldn't they happen? Okay, well, there's something to think about. Questions?
Hello.
Yes,
I'm
please.
Saleh from CC.
Yes, sir.
I want to ask about the process starting. Do you need to start from business side or IT side, or where is the process need to be started from?
Yeah. So it's a good question, Salah. So where should we start? You know, how do we get process-based management going in our organizations? I don't think there's a particular place to start. It often does start in IT, in my experience, because the folk in IT come across the problem that business units don't understand their processes, but IT is supposed to build a system to help with the process. So they often are forced into that. of course, in many of your organizations in Saudi Arabia, you have business excellence teams or organizational excellence, which would often involve process work. So if you've got such a place, then that's where it's going to start. And that's where your process center of excellence is going to live, I guess. But it can live anywhere. I think the most important three things maybe. You need some kind of executive support. It doesn't have to be the whole executive, but somebody somewhere, some deputy somewhere needs to actually think this is a good idea and encourage it. And as soon as they are in that state of mind, then things can happen, and it doesn't matter which deputyship it is, really, I suppose. Then they can get on and make it happen. And then you've got some small central team, and you've got a methodology, and you've got a plan, a development plan. And then the third thing, of course, as we've been emphasizing here in this webinar, you need to deliver benefits. You have to prove it's worth doing. As process practitioners, we all often fall for the trap. We kind of assume it's worth doing. We know it's worth doing. Of course it is. But the rest of the world doesn't have that same certainty that we have. We've got to demonstrate it. We've got to prove it with hard data and show that it's worth doing and it's effective and there's a nice return on the effort. So I think it can start in all sorts of places, but executive support, some resources internally with method and plan, and then deliver benefits as quickly as possible. And as quickly as possible is not, kind of next year or in a year or two. I think that's way too long. I don't have any hard data on this, but my sense is always that the organizational attention span starts to run out after maybe 3 months. If you've been talking about process work and pushing it hard for 3 months and you can't point to some benefits delivered, then I think you might start to have a problem. So executive support, some resources, and deliver the benefits, and don't take forever about it. Does that help, Salah?
Yes. What's best solution to solve the resistance of people that they want to do or practice this process?
So I'll just start that again. I missed the first bit.
Always there is resistance to implement the process. Is it solved by the executive support or delivering or showing the benefits? So sometimes they ask for a cost benefit of the process before the process itself.
Yeah, that's right. And we started a project not so long ago. I won't say where. It may not even be in the kingdom, but I started a project, and one of the first meetings I had with the chief executive, he said, "I'm trying to get rid of process. I don't want to manage them. I don't want to improve them. I want to eliminate them," which was a tough way to start a project. But he had a very different view about process. And it's very hard right up front to say, here's the cost benefit. But I think, we can actually say, we're not looking for a massive expenditure. We can just do this a piece at a time. It's quite incremental. We're not looking to build everything. And I think, for most executives also, if you say, we get work done across the organization, and we're not measuring or managing that cross-functional series of activities, we're just hoping all the pieces come together. And I mean, in my experience, that kind of argument also works with an executive. You can't say that's not true. It's obviously true. So you can have that kind of discussion, but then they want to know, okay, well, if we can't quite quantify the benefits, what are the costs? Because they immediately start thinking that this is going to be massively expensive, and it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be, and we want to start small and incremental, and build it out. Demonstrate those proven valued business benefits, but also just make sure that when perhaps before you start having the conversation about what you might do about it, that people have the same shared understanding of what we mean by process and process improvement. What does it mean? Why is it important? What is a cross-functional business process? These are terms that some people find very abstract, and scary. And, you know, some of the executives in our organizations will never get it. They'll never like it, but we probably don't need them all. So, you know, find the one or two who think it's interesting and start there.
Yes, most of them, I think people with the procurement, so they don't want to have changes in their process because they said they have the benefit for them. Sometimes they are afraid that you change their process and you have to take some benefit or some.
That's right. Yeah. Why would you people come here to tell us how to run our procurement department? You know, if everyone just followed our current processes, we'd all be much better off. Everyone's trying to buy stuff without using the processes. So, you know, those kinds of places can have very large walls built around them, can't they? And maybe if that's the circumstance in the organization, maybe that's not the best place to start. But there's always someone somewhere who's got a process problem and who's open to the idea of addressing it in that way. And, you know, maybe there are some parts of our organizations which will never get done. But equally, people like procurement and HR and finance and IT are very process-oriented groups. You know, the folk in those areas are, you know, they have a very real sense of process because they're doing it all the time. You know, people who are doing recruitment understand that it's a process. They might think it's their process and they don't have a view of other people being involved, but you know, it's, yeah. So you've got to find people that are interested, and if they're not interested, then put them on the list for later. Yeah. How are we doing, Malik?
Thanks.
You still with us, Malik?
Assalam.
I've got a question, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay, please. Yep.
Thanks, Mr. Roger, for this actually informative session. I would like also to thank ES Learning or Consulting for conducting this kind of session. That's really appreciated. I've got actually two questions. What to do with the startup organization that have not started yet with establishing a kind of process modeling? This is the first one. And the second one, have you got from your own experience with some Saudi organizations? Are there any certain enablers or even inhibitors to develop a culture that embed the concept of improvement? Because as Mr. Saleh mentioned earlier, there must be some resistance to this kind of initiative of improvements.
Yep, sure. So let me give a quick answer because we've only got a couple of minutes left. So how to start if an organization hasn't done anything in process at all? I think we start with the process architecture. So I would be looking for, it would be nice if it was the most senior executives, but some executive somewhere with some interest in it. And the first thing to do is be building a process architecture, building this view of the organization as a set of processes. Now, that's not a particularly difficult thing to do, assuming you've got a good strategy, and most organizations do. Then translating that into a process architecture, a few levels of process architecture, is a relatively straightforward thing to do. We do it all the time. And then you've got a picture, and now you can say, okay, what are we going to do with that? Okay, we'll pick a process or two or three, and we'll start managing that to demonstrate the benefits. So I think that's the way to do it. It might take you a lot of conversation and a lot of briefings and discussions with decision makers to get to that point, because they need to understand what you mean by process and process improvement and process management and all of those things, and not be, you know, scared off by the thought that it's a massive thing to do. So that's how I would start. I think you're blessed in the kingdom in that I see more serious process work going on in the kingdom than in many other places. Vision 2030 is a big push, you know. You go back and have a look at Vision 2030 and vision realization plans, and I see process all the time. even if it doesn't say so. It's all about performance improvement. It's about process. So we've done many projects there that are directly or indirectly driven by Vision 2030 kinds of development. I think, you know, in any organization, in any country, what you really want to do is have some enthusiasm at the executive level for it to continue. And you need to start with a bit of that and then build that up. And then just get on and you know, don't try and change the world. We're just improving the world one process at a time, you know, and deliver those benefits. I think we've run out of time. Malik, have we? I'm happy to talk all day, but we're in your hands.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you for the presentation and for answering the questions. شكرا للجميع، شاكرين لحضوركم وتفاعلكم وأسئلتكم. نرجو أن نراكم دائما في أمسيات متجددة ومتنوعة تتعلق بإدارة إجراءات العمل، وتصبحون على خير. شكرا للجميع.